42 of Uncensored. I am your host, Keith Andrew. Along here is my good friend, Rick Snyder. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to redo the interview.
No worries, Keith. As a matter of fact, I have a new topic that I want to discuss on today's interview, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Okay, so as you may or may not know, I work with adolescents in the mental health field, and quite frequently what I find is that parents are at a loss when something happens with their child. They have absolutely no idea where to turn or what to do or how to deal with it. So I would like to present a little bit of information for any parent out there who has a teenager who finds that things are going wrong with them, and how you can go ahead and get the resources that you need. Now, I know you're in New York, is that correct?
Yes, but I don't mean to interrupt. Your wife is in the background. Does she want to be on camera, or she doesn't care?
She doesn't care. She's going to wander back and forth.
All right, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. She's leaving the room now. Okay, you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. I just wanted to make sure so later on there was no, misunderstanding.
Sure, no problem. So, first of all, mental health. It addresses how children and adolescents being from 13 to about 22, addresses how they think, how they feel, and how they act as they face the challenges of life. It's a really important part of their development. It affects how they handle challenges. It affects how they learn, how they process, how they form friendships, how they make decisions about their lives. And it also affects their sense of hope and the way they look at themselves, their relationships, their family, their teachers, their friends, and the choices they make about smoking, using drugs or alcohol, or taking other risks. So, as caregivers, as family members, and as adults working with kids, we do our best to promote healthy physical development and identify and address any physical or medical challenges. So, children, just like adults, adolescents, just like adults, can have mental health or substance use problems that interfere with the way they think, the way they feel, the way they act. Teens have ups and downs. They're always going through one thing or another, and some of the stuff that they deal with is just regular teenage stuff, and some of it can be really, really difficult. Now, quite frequently what I hear kids say is, well, I turn to my friends, and my friends help me with different things. And peer support is really important. It's great. But sometimes when the symptoms of mental illness are present, sometimes you need to turn to a professional, or at least start with your parents. So kids don't always do that, and we as parents and we as adults have to guide them in that direction. And not just accept that they're going to talk to their friends about it, and then it's going to be okay because they talk to their friends about it. We're going to push them to do something different. And mental illnesses include things like depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, borderline personality, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, attention deficit disorder, or attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and many more things that can interfere with their life on a daily basis. So, the ones that I see most frequently are I see kids that are depressed. And when a teenager presents with depression, it's much different than when an adult presents with depression. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Bipolar can have the elements of being manic and sort of hyperactive and grandiose, as well as depressed. Schizophrenia presents with symptoms where somebody may say they're hearing voices, or they may say they see things that aren't there. Just like in the film A Beautiful Mind, in which John Nash had a whole delusional system in which he believed that there were people that talked to him and advised him, and it wasn't true. So early identification, very, very important. Believe it or not, in 2009, children and adolescents made up 27% of the population in the United States. about 21% have a diagnosable mental health or addictive disorder that affects their ability to function. So incomprehensible almost that a fourth of adolescents suffer from some sort of substance abuse or mental health issue, but they do. And quite frequently, they'll just keep it to themselves. They'll keep it under wraps and act as if everything's okay, and parents may or may not know. You know, a child may be cutting on themselves and hiding it. They may be doing it on their legs or wear long sleeves or any number of things. So some of the things that we as parents need to be looking for to try and find these things are substantial mood swings. You know, if your kid, and who knows the kid better than the parent, hopefully, substantial mood swings, persistently aggressive behavior, acting really withdrawn or sad or overly anxious. They may be threatening themselves or they may be threatening others. They may be, again, having these hallucinations, paranoia, or delusions. They may have a sudden or persistent drop in their school performance. A kid that's doing really well in school may all of a sudden, out of nowhere, start getting poorer and poorer grades due to depression or due to bipolar or due to some mental illness kind of a thing that's going on with them. So these are things to be aware of. They may have extreme difficulty in interacting with friends or with their brothers or sisters. If a kid who normally got along semi-okay with their brother or sister suddenly can't get along with them at all, it might be a sign that something's going on. They may have extreme changes in sleeping or eating patterns. They may want to sleep all the time. They may never sleep. You may find them up in the middle of the night. They may stop eating or they may overeat. And they may have an increased or persistent use of alcohol or drugs. So how do you tell the difference between a moody teenager and a true set of mood swings that indicate mental illness, right? Because teenagers in and of themselves are moody. So one of the things is that you just have to be aware of what your child's baseline behavior is. What's baseline behavior? Well, baseline behavior would be what we normally do throughout the course of the day. You know, we're not flatlined here. We're up and down throughout the course of the day doing a number of different things. But if you, as the parent or as the guardian of that child, happens to notice that there's an extreme difference in the way their moods go up and down, that's a cause for concern. Behavioral changes. Of course, behavior changes as kids get older. They do different things. They have different interests. They may or may not be interested in their parents. More likely they're not. But if your son or daughter is presenting as a totally different person and it's noticeable to you, that might be a sign that something's going on, either a mental illness or substance abuse. There might be consequences in school and among friends. They might be creating a disturbance at school. Teachers quite frequently are one of the first to notice these things because kids behave a certain way in class, and if they start behaving differently, well, you might be getting that phone call from their teacher, from the principal, that things are going on at school. They may be acting out. They may get themselves suspended. They may find themselves in trouble at school. Physical symptoms could include things like decreased energy, like I said, changes in eating or sleeping. They might have a frequent stomach ache or a headache. They may complain of what we call somatic illnesses. A somatic illness is something that your mind causes you to have. So aches and pains for no real reason, stomach ache for no real reason. And that's not to say that you shouldn't rule out the physical reasons why these things may happen, but that's just to say that you should pay attention to that and note that things are happening that there may not be a real substantial reason for. Maybe there's a change in their hygiene, you know, maybe they start wearing radical makeup, guys and girls, or maybe they stop caring for themselves and stop cleaning up, stop showering, not so particular about their clothes and their grooming. And again, not necessarily a definite sign, but it could be that mental treatment is needed, mental health treatment is needed. And self-medicating, of course. If you find that your kid is using drugs or alcohol, that may be a sign that they're medicating themselves, that they're depressed. And I hear that from kids all the time. You know, drugs are the only things that make me feel better. And of course, once the drugs have worn off, they feel exactly the same as they felt before, and they're still depressed. So if you see those things, those are some things that you want to look for. You might want to look for professional help for your kid. You might want to take them into a counselor, a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, even your pediatrician for an evaluation of drug abuse, what to look for. If your kid is neglecting responsibilities in school or at work or at home, for example, they're flunking classes, they're skipping their job, they're neglecting their chores because of drug use, that could be because of drug use. They might be using under dangerous conditions or taking risks while high, such as driving the car while they're under the influence or having unprotected sex. It might be creating legal problems for them. I can't speak for the police in New York, but here the police will stop a person and take a field report, and the more they do that, the more often they do that, the more likely it is that you're going to be arrested. So kids that hang out at places where drugs are being used may find themselves in that situation. Drug use can cause problems in relationships. You might be fighting. You might be fighting with your family members. You might be fighting with your friends. Your friends may not want to hang out with you. So what's the difference between abuse and addiction? Well, the symptoms are that with an addiction, you start building up a tolerance to drugs. You need to use more and more of the same drug to experience the same effects. You take drugs to avoid or relieve withdrawal symptoms, and of course that would be things like methamphetamine and heroin, Vicodin, any of the opioids that might be that you could get as a prescription medication, and prescription medications are quite widely abused. You might lose control over your drug use, often your kid might do more drugs than they think that they can, more often than they want to do them, even though they've told themselves that they wouldn't. They may want to stop, but they can't stop. You may find that their life seems to revolve around their drug use. They spend most of the day sleeping, they get up and spend the rest of the day storing drugs. They may, and this applies to depression as well, they may stop doing the things that they used to love to do. And they may quit sports, quit socializing with friends, quit hobbies because of their drug use. And continue to use them even though they know that it's hurting them. So some of the physical things, of course, that you would look for: bloodshot eyes, pupils larger or smaller than usual, changes in appetite or sleep patterns, sudden weight loss or sudden weight gain, deterioration in their physical appearance. You might detect unusual smells on their breath, on their body, on their clothing. They may have tremors, which means that their hands may shake. They may have slurred speech or impaired coordination. They might find they might stop going to school or be ditching school. Hold on a second, let me let my dogs out here. Come on, dogs. They're wandering around in the background. Okay, so they may also engage in secretive or suspicious behaviors. So if your kid's being particularly secretive, they may wear sunglasses in the house, like me. That's what I used to do when I was a kid. And there might be a sudden change in friends or their favorite hangouts or their hobbies or the things that they do, and they may frequently get into trouble. So some of the psychological warning signs would be a change in personality or attitude. Again, the sudden mood swings that are unexplained by just normal mood swings or by some sort of mental illness. They may have periods of unusual hyperactivity, agitation, or giddiness, and you'll see that with cocaine, you'll see that with methamphetamine or any kind of speed. They have a total lack of motivation, or they might seem spaced out, they may seem lethargic, or they could be fearful, anxious, paranoid for no reason. So those are some of the signs of drug use and drug abuse. And parents sometimes ask themselves, so why do some kids seem to not be able to let go of this, and some kids can try it once and it's not an issue for them? So, just like with many other conditions and diseases, vulnerability to addiction, it differs from person to person. It's genetic, it's your mental health, it's your family and social environment that all play a role in addiction. And some risk factors that increase vulnerability are a family history of addiction. So if somebody in your family was an alcoholic or a drug addict, that's going to increase your possibility or your child's possibility. Abuse, neglect, or traumatic experiences in childhood. Depression and anxiety and other mental disorders simply exacerbate the possibility of becoming strung out or addicted. And the way that you use drugs, whether you smoke it or whether you inject it, may increase its addictive potential. And of course, the earlier a person starts using, the more likely it's going to be that they become addicted. So here's 5 myths about drug abuse and drug addiction. Overcoming addiction is simply a matter of willpower. You can stop drugs if you really want to. Prolonged exposure to drugs alters the brain in ways that result in powerful cravings and a compulsion to use. Methamphetamine is the perfect example. Methamphetamine actually changes the synapse in your brain and the way the receptors work so that you have to have it in order to continue to feel good. The brain changes make it extremely difficult to quit by sheer force of will. Whenever I get a kid who tells me, well, I haven't used in a couple days. Well, they haven't used in a couple days because they haven't been able to get drugs. And most people cannot just quit by sheer force of will. They can't stop a bad habit by sheer force of will. Myth number 2, addiction is a disease. There's nothing you can do about it. Most experts agree that addiction is a brain disease, but that doesn't mean that you're a helpless victim. The changes that are associated with addiction can be treated and reversed through therapy, through medication, through exercise, and through other treatments. Myth number 3, that addicts have to hit rock bottom before they can be helped. Unfortunately, sometimes hitting rock bottom can mean death. So, recovery can begin at any point in the addiction process. The earlier, the better. The longer drug abuse continues, the stronger the addiction becomes, the harder it is to treat. Don't wait to intervene on behalf of your child until everything's gone. And myth number 4, you can't force a person into treatment. They have to want help. Well, while it's true that it is beneficial for a person to want to be helped, it's not necessary. It doesn't have to be voluntary to be successful. People who are pressured into treatment by their family, their employers, or the legal system are just as likely to benefit as those who choose to enter treatment on their own. The clearer your thinking becomes, the more you sober up, the more likely it is that you're going to want to do something different. And last but not least, treatment didn't work before, so there's no point in trying again. Most addicts relapse 4 or 5 times in the first year that they're trying to get sober. So recovery from drug addiction is a long process. It quite frequently involves setbacks. Relapsing doesn't mean that treatment has failed or that it's a lost cause. It's just a signal to get back on track and try again. Okay. So what should parents do with their kids? Here's a couple of things that parents worry about. Well, if I mention suicide to my kid, that's going to put that thought in his head, and he's going to want to commit suicide. So they don't. All right, that's not true. It's it's actually much better to ask somebody if they're thinking about committing suicide, if they have a plan to commit suicide, than it is to keep it quiet and keep it under wraps. By doing that, you bring it out into the open, and the chances of getting treatment are far greater. So some parents have fears about mental health treatment, and they might resist any effort to identify mental health problems in their kids for a number of reasons. They may express concerns about meds, thinking that that's all that's going to happen because psychotropic medications are overused, and they are. Quite honestly, medications are overused. So you want to carefully pick somebody who's going to be treating your child so that they can monitor the way medications are dispensed, monitor the dose, and make sure that at the earliest possible time, the medications can be adjusted or titrated off of the patient. So, what do you do if you suspect that your kid is having a mental health issue? Well, you're going to want to talk to your pediatrician first. That's your first line of defense. Go to your pediatrician. And sadly, not all pediatricians are skilled in mental health. So you want to make sure that they are not just going to brush this off, but they're going to give the kid an examination. They're going to rule out any of the physical problems or medical problems that might be causing the issues that we've been talking about. Also, your pediatrician can recommend you to a mental health professional, and quite frequently mental health professionals have a full load of patients, so having your pediatrician recommend you will get you in there sooner and get you assessed sooner, get your kid assessed sooner. You can work with the school, and there's a lot of different things that you can do with your school. This No Child Left Behind law that we have, that's national, as far as I know. It applies in New York as well as in California. Am I correct?
Yes.
So this No Child Left Behind means that regardless of who the kid is or what their issues are, the school has to provide an education for them commensurate with their ability to learn. So you can ask for an evaluation for an individual educational plan, an IEP for your child. And your school is required to evaluate the child. So you work with your school, you work with the officials there, you work with the principal and the therapist at your school, and they will evaluate your child, and they will assist you in getting the help that he or she needs. You might want to connect with other families who have similar issues. So some kids, the school will have some reference material for you, some websites, maybe even social media. Facebook is a great place to connect with other families who have children at risk. So you might want to connect there. The National Institute for Mental Health, NIMH, they will be able to put you in touch with other families who have kids at risk. And it's really, really helpful to be able to talk to other parents who have children going through the same thing, so you don't feel like you're on your own. So if you discover that your kid has a drug problem, well, that could be really, really frightening too. So here's some steps that parents can take if you discover that your kid's using drugs. You lay down rules and you set consequences. Your kid should understand that using drugs comes with specific consequences. However, what you don't want to do is make hollow threats or rules that you can't enforce. So if I find you're using drugs, you're grounded for a year, which simply means that the parent is grounded for a year and nobody can follow through with that. So make sure that your spouse is on the same page as you. Make sure that if you're going to set consequences, that you're willing to follow through with the consequences, and there are things that you can do. Monitor your kids' activity. You got to know where they go, who they're with, who they hang out with. It's important to routinely check potential hiding places for drugs in backpacks, between books on a shelf, in DVD cases, makeup cases. Explain to your teen that this lack of privacy is just a consequence for having been caught using drugs. Encourage them to expand their interests and social activities. Expose them to healthy hobbies. Expose them to other activities, team sports, after-school clubs. Sports is great, man. If you can get your kid involved in sports, it takes up a lot of time. It requires a lot of energy. Unfortunately, don't think for a minute that if you get your kid involved in sports, that every kid who's involved in sports doesn't use drugs, because that's not true. They do. You still have to monitor their activity. Talk to your kid about why they use drugs, about what the issues are underneath. Quite frequently, drugs, even though they're a problem, are not the problem. The problem might be some underlying issue, depression, anxiety, something that's happened to them that they don't want to deal with. Let them know what your concerns are. Offer help, offer support. Don't be judgmental. The earlier addictions treated, the better. Don't wait for them to hit rock bottom. Be prepared for them to have excuses and be in denial. As they say, denial, not just a river in Egypt. So be prepared for that. Be prepared to give specific examples of their behavior that have you concerned. And definitely take care of yourself in the process. As a parent, if you're not taking care of yourself, there's nothing you can do for your kid. You can't help somebody if you're totally distraught, if you're out of control yourself. So, and avoid self-blame. You know, people develop issues for whatever reasons that they do, okay? It's not necessarily the fault of the parent, unless, of course, you're doing something grossly inappropriate with your child, in which case it might be your fault. What you don't want to do is you don't want to punish. There's a difference between consequences and punishment. Consequences are the result of making bad choices. Punishment is something that we usually do so that we feel better about what's happened. Don't threaten, don't bribe, don't preach, don't try to be a martyr. Don't avoid emotional appeals that may only increase feelings of guilt. You know, as a Jew growing up, I know that guilt is a very popular method for Jewish mothers to use. So avoid trying to make them feel guilty. Avoid trying to say, oh, you're making me so bad, or you're making me look so bad. Do not cover up or make excuses for the person who's using drugs. Don't make it okay for them to do it. Don't shield them from the negative consequences of their behavior. Parents will quite frequently try and get kids out of trouble if they've gotten in trouble over their drug use. Don't take over their responsibilities, leaving them with no sense of importance or dignity. So the things that they're supposed to be doing, don't do it. Don't hide their drugs. Don't throw out their drugs. Don't argue with them when they're high. That's not going to work. Don't use drugs with them. Don't drink with them and don't use with them. All right? So, there's some obstacles that might get in the way when you're seeking help for your child for mental health or substance abuse issues. You might say to yourself, I'm embarrassed and I feel uncomfortable about the problem. Well, feeling uncomfortable about personal problems is not unusual. Most people don't just talk about their personal issues. Of course it's going to put you out of your comfort zone. Of course it's going to make you feel uncomfortable. As a way to avoid addressing a problem, parents might ignore it, hoping that the child will outgrow it. They're probably not going to outgrow depression or bipolar or schizophrenia or their substance abuse. Like many things in life, we often imagine that it's far worse than the reality. Mental health professionals have experience with these issues. They can help you be more reality-oriented to what's going on. They're familiar with your concerns, and they're trained to deal with us as parents as well as our teenagers. So how about this one? My child won't go. Well, children and teens rely on and require our thinking to get them involved in treatment. Talking directly and honestly with them can sometimes allay their concerns. Forcing someone into treatment is usually unsuccessful. To have them go to a therapist and sit there and not talk is counterproductive. But an attitude of concern that transmits an understanding of how difficult it is to accept help might be useful. And maybe family therapy to start with might be helpful. And worst case scenario, if your child is in an emergent situation where they're threatening to harm you or threatening to harm themselves or threatening to commit suicide, take them to the closest emergency room. Anybody who is brought to an emergency room has to be assessed, has to be evaluated, and they may end up on the psychiatric unit there where they can get treatment, get medications, get these things sorted out. How about, I don't know any mental health professionals.
Well, the light at the end of the tunnel that will guide you through, or that
start with your pediatrician. Get a recommendation from a trusted friend or a family member. Check with a clinic that's affiliated with your local hospital or medical school. Check national or local professional organizations. Check with the National Institute of Mental Health. They've got a list. They can give it to you. And I don't know how I would fit in. How about that? Or I don't know how I would fit it in. I'm just too busy. I can't get treatment for my child. Well, it's important to make time available for your kid and to adjust your family schedule. Be realistic about the logistics of getting treatment. Obviously, you don't want to drive 40 miles to a therapist 3 times a week each way, so you're going to have to find somebody a little bit closer. You're going to have to find somebody who can make the accommodations for you and create a time schedule that's going to work for you. That's doable. And how about, I can't afford treatment? Well, there's a variety of low-cost clinics, often through graduate training programs or hospitals. I don't know how Obamacare works with mental health, but that's certainly worth looking into. Insurance company reimbursement has been improved due to recent changes in the law. If you find somebody who's not covered by your insurance plan or is beyond your means, quite frequently they will work on a sliding scale. You can ask them to make the adjustment, and they will. Sometimes parents say to themselves, if your kid needs help, it must mean I'm a bad parent. Well, mental illness is stigmatized in our society. You know what? It's actually easier to accept that your kid is a drug addict than that your kid has a mental illness. And just across the board, that's easier to accept. People are very, very prejudicial about mental illness. They're more accepting about drug addiction and drug abuse. So media images and news stories, they might portray distorted images of mental illness. Look at the way that it's portrayed on television and shows. So mental illness is like any other illness. It is an illness, and it can be treated. It's not because you've done something to make your child mentally ill. Post-traumatic stress disorder, that might be something that you played a hand in. Or things may have happened to your child that you don't even know about. So treatment is something that's good for a child. The unexamined life is not worth living. So it's always a good idea to take a look. And how about this one? I heard treatment lasts forever. Well, there's a myth that is perpetrated by the media that if you go into therapy, you'll be in therapy forever. And yes, I have to say that it's true that in the past, some therapists have been somewhat unscrupulous about keeping patients coming back over and over and over again. And how about this? All they do is give drugs. This is not true. There's a lot of different treatment modalities that can be used. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a very popular modality. And what it means simply is that your thinking drives your behavior. You get a thought in your head, and you behave according to that thought. So cognitive behavioral therapy helps you to look at the things you think and try and adjust the way you think or change it. For example, what's the sense of trying? Nothing's ever going to change. So you just get this attitude that you're going to give up. Dialectical behavioral therapy, which is like cognitive behavioral therapy but much more concrete, works really well with borderline personality disorder, works well with people who have depression that they can't seem to get relief from in any other way. Behavior therapy, and that's just specific to the behavior that the child is exhibiting. Verbal psychotherapy, that's the traditional talk therapy where you come in, you talk about things that are going on. Family therapy, the entire family comes in, and you treat the family as a whole rather than treating just the kid. And sadly, most parents think that this is not my problem, this is my kid's problem. And the truth is that we all play a role in family dynamics. So things that are going on with our kids are certainly placed upon us to a certain degree. The way we interact with them, the way we respond to the things that we say. Very seldom do you find a patient or with a parent that's just so perfect that you look at them and you go, God, I can't believe this happened. I mean, their parent is just absolutely awesome. So, everybody's got their issues. Group therapy might be something that works. That works for some people and I do a lot of groups where I work, and group therapy is very, very helpful because it gives you the opportunity as a patient to see that you're not the only person who's ever felt this way, that you're not the only one that this has ever happened to. And of course, some parents think to themselves, well, other people are going to find out, they'll think there's something wrong with me or my child. Well, get over it, man. This is your kid. You're going to have to deal with this, and it's going to have to be addressed, and you don't have to broadcast it to the neighborhood if you don't want to, if this is an issue for you. But what you're doing as a parent by getting your child help is the right thing. That's the right choice to make. So, where do you get resources for this kind of thing? Who does this kind of treatment? So, professional credentials and training. You might go to a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is a doctor. He's an MD. He can prescribe medications, and they sometimes also do therapy as well. A psychologist. A psychologist has a PhD or a PsyD, and they can provide therapy. They can give psychological tests, but they can't give medications. You might go to a social worker, and social workers aren't strictly, as people think, that person who comes to the house to check up on bad conditions or family issues, although that's part of what some social workers do. But a social worker usually has a master's in social work, or they're a licensed clinical social worker, and they're able to do therapy with you. MFCC, that's a marriage, family, and child counselor. They have a master's degree, and they can do therapy with you. And there's other professionals, mental health counselors. That's pretty much what I do. I'm a mental health counselor. A pastoral counselor. Based on your religion, you might go to your minister or your priest or your rabbi to get help. And, of course, you may... Some professionals with or without state licensure may be certified by their own professional organization. So what do you want to look for with any of these people? Well, you want to look at their experience. They should have training and experience with kids and adolescents. You don't want to bring your kid to somebody that works with geriatric patients, with the babushkas, the old folks, right? You want to bring them to somebody who works with teenagers. The type and format of treatment. Well, you want to understand the scope of the treatment, what they're going to do, which one of those things that we talked about are they going to use, how long is it going to last, how many times a week do you have to go. You want to look at the cost. Does your insurance cover it? Is there a sliding scale? Universities quite frequently offer therapy programs for the public as an opportunity to let their graduate students get training and practice. It's, believe it or not, they see so many people that they are experienced. They do have a good background in that, and they would be a worthwhile resource. The location, the ease, the accessibility, like I said, you don't want to be driving 40 miles each way to get there, and you want to make sure that the times that they can see you can accommodate you. If you only have the evening time, you want to find somebody who can see you after 6 o'clock or after 7 o'clock. So how do you decide if it's the right one? Well, it's a crapshoot, really. But the upshot is that there's so many professionals that you could literally find 10,000 people in your city, in your area, in your town that could be the right one. So what I usually use as a rule of thumb is if I go 2 or 3 times, or if I have a patient go 2 or 3 times and they're not clicking with the person that they're seeing, find somebody else. But give it at least 2 or 3 times to build a relationship and find out. So a couple of the organizations that you can turn to. The National Association, the NAMI, which is the National Association of Mental Health Institute, or some other advocacy organization. You might check with the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and you'll find them online. You just click on Child and Adolescent Psychiatrist Finder. You might want to check with the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, otherwise known as SAMHSA, SAMHSA. And they've got tons of free material online. They will point you in the right direction. They can address the mental health needs and the substance abuse needs of adolescents. And of course, anybody who is in a suicidal crisis can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And that telephone number is 1-800-273-TALK. It's 24 hours, and you're routed to the caller's nearest crisis center. There's also one called YouMatter, YOUMATTER. It's a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And that's online. It comes with a blog, and people who have suicidal issues are constantly doing that. NAMI, N-A-M-I, is also available online at NAMI.org. There's a thing called Warmline Network Services. It's for people who are struggling with mental health and substance abuse issues, and the staff who provide the services have been through similar things, so they're very understanding, and that number is 877-910-WARM. So, support. Who can be supportive? Well, family members, of course, close friends, therapists, counselors, other recovering addicts or abusers, healthcare providers, and people from your faith community. So there's a lot of resources available out there, but I know what I almost always experience outside of the hospital setting is a parent whose child is having some sort of issue. They're lost. They don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. So I hope some of this stuff is helpful, and you can always check my blog. It's Mr. Mental Health on Google, the Google blog. So Mr. Mental Health, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions that you have, or at least try and point you in the right direction. And remember, stay healthy.